Thank you, Marty. Thank you, David. It's good to be back with everybody this month. It's been since January that I last gave a presentation to the CAC, and we've been doing a lot over the last 2 months. So we've been very busy trying to land this plane, so to speak. As David mentioned, we're intending to go to the Planning Commission on April 26th. So that will be here very soon. And so we've been doing a couple things, well, really more than a couple things, but since we've last met, we're really trying to get the Railroad Corridor Plan document into its final form. So that's kind of been a behind the scenes work effort, and you'll be able to see that document in its entirety here soon. And we've been working diligently to introduce and respond to as many comments that have been raised by this group into that document, whether they're direct changes or edits or revisions to written words or images. And then we've also added a really helpful FAQ page because most, if not all, of this project has been done while we're all meeting virtually. We thought it would be helpful to include a number of the very recurring comments or questions into the body of the document for transparency and clarity, and each of those have been responded to in kind. So when you see that document, you'll notice that. As for tonight's presentation, I'm going to pick up where we left off kind of in January with regard to phase 2. And so as we get into phase 2, I'll just start with a brief outline for tonight's presentation. I'll do a very brief recap of where we were during our January meeting. As you know, in February, we listened to comments regarding to phase 1. And so we are kind of back to phase 2 for tonight. I will kind of pick up where I left off. Last time we talked about the north section of phase 2. Tonight we'll talk about central and south. But then we'll also, after we introduce kind of background data of central and south, we'll go into looking at concept plans and recommendations for the entire phase 2 area. So we do have quite a bit we're going to cover tonight. And then once I've introduced sort of the background data and then our proposed resolutions or solutions or concepts related to those insights, I'll lay out for you the next couple of steps of what's happening for this project. And then I'd like to allow part 5 of this presentation to really be for public interaction, questions, and reflections. So I'll try to go as swiftly as I can through my talking points to leave as much time as we can for public discourse. Again, phase 2 is tonight. That's the orange part of this map. So that's from John Warner Parkway south to the city line. And within phase 2, we have organized the corridor into 3 phases: north, central, and south. And so this is, again, just a brief recap of that organization. And tonight, we're talking about primarily central and south in terms of background data, but then we'll bring the north section back in when we talk about proposed concepts. Okay, so again, since we last talked, we've done a deep dive into the central and southern portions of the corridor. And there's a lot happening and there's a lot to talk about. Really, we wanted to understand what's happening, what has happened, what will be happening. We wanted to identify deficiencies and safety concerns. And we wanted to understand those so that our proposed solutions can address those items. And so I've gone with a slightly different format tonight in how I introduced that, going more photographic than anything so you can see what I'm talking about. So obviously, in the central section, kind of like the north section, there's ongoing work. There's improvements happening. You've probably noticed this or been waiting in a longer queue of cars than normal as a construction flagger is out in the roadway. So there's work happening in the central section now, currently. But even though the county is currently infilling the sidewalk, even when they're done with that, there's still going to be portions of this part of the corridor that are still lacking just basic pedestrian amenities. So We're getting better, but we still have work to do. And some of the pedestrian facilities we do have specifically have weird alignments. If you recall the sidewalk in front of the Catholic school, we observe what's kind of a strange phenomenon with how the sidewalk meanders through the trees. And don't get me wrong, I think it's very lovely and nice, but it is an interesting attribute of this corridor. It's relatively atypical when you talk about pedestrian facilities within a public transportation corridor. So that's a unique item, and we're going to come back to that a little later. Interestingly enough, there's not a left-hand turn at Town Lane, which we think is an interesting attribute of the corridor, especially in as much as there's so many turn lanes in the corridor, both right-hand and left-hand turn lanes, and that this is just notably absent. And so we took note that, and I do believe, and I might get this wrong, but I think that turn lane is warranted. So, or at least based on our initial assumptions and calculations. So there should be a left-hand turn lane there at Town Lane. The central section is the first bit of the roadway that at least we've specifically identified some very quantifiable sight distance challenges, both vertical and on a vertical roadway line and also the horizontally. So this car is shown here in this picture. If you've actually turned off of Penn Park Lane onto Rio, it is visually challenged. The sight distances are challenged and obstructed. Interestingly enough, the vertical geometry of the roadway also provides unique obstructions. There's a vertical curve here at this intersection, so the road has a curve like my hands are showing, and it's not the right vertical curvature for the speed limit of the roadway. So we'll come back to that as well. And then another very interesting portion attribute of the central section of this roadway is that the lane widths are highly variable. We're seeing a lot of inconsistencies with the widths available for vehicles to travel, which is an opportunity for us as we work to kind of think about what we can fit into this roadway, what we should do with the space we have. It's in some ways it's a luxury to have some extra lane widths, but we have lanes as wide as I think 14 feet next to lanes that are as narrow as 11 feet. And so there's a disparity in how the asphalt is being organized and the space is being used. It's also interesting to note that there are no bicycle facilities along this portion of the road. And finally, here at the southern end of the central section, if that's not enough to get you oriented with where we are, the entrances for Stonehenge, but also Rockbrook Drive, pose a very interesting challenge in terms of access management and really safety for that matter. There's a number of accidents that have been recorded right here. And I mean, if you're actually looking to try to know what's going on at that intersection, although it should be two intersections, but I'm just going to call it one ambiguous intersection, it's not hard to imagine that it's a little confusing what to do there. If you're a new driver, even an experienced driver, it's not exactly clear how vehicles should be interacting with each other at that intersection. So those are just general observations of ours, or some of the most noteworthy ones of the central section of this corridor. So I'm going to keep moving on my observations down into the southern portion of the corridor, and then we'll come back through everything. So the south section, this is really, and this is where it starts. If the central section is not interesting, the southern becomes immensely interesting. There's just this almost unraveling of safety and predictability the further south you go on Rio Road. So interesting to note, not only has the guardrail been hit some number of times in some number of locations along this portion of the roadway, the current guardrail is not up to current standards. And so we've observed that deficiency, and we'll be certainly making some comment about that deficiency. The guardrail's there because this roadway is more or less carved along a slope. And so you have very constrained conditions on both sides of the roadway. So really any improvements you'd want to make are rather constrained on the transverse access of the road. Another interesting thing to note about this portion of the corridor is that a lot of these hairpin turns don't allow for adequate sight distance along the roadway. And that's further compounded as a result of the turning radii along these curves being too small for what the speed along this roadway is. And so you can start to see, and you're only going to see it more as I continue to go on, the challenges in the southern portion of this corridor start to just compound. So we have inadequate sight distance, we have turning radius too small, we have guardrails that are not up to current code. And then we start to have these strange spaces along the roadway where, and I know that all of you have experienced this, you have extra pavement that you're not even really sure why it's there, but it's there, and then there's vegetation growing into the road, and then there's drainage inlets occasionally, and there's a lot of cracking, potholes. It's just kind of this strange roadway shoulder, right? And then I know everyone's probably experienced this. You see someone who wants to make a left-hand turn onto Agnes Street, which takes you into the city up to Locust Avenue. And because the pavement markings are lacking in their clarity, and because the roadway is sufficiently wide due to that paved shoulder we just looked at, you start to see cars doing things like that red truck is doing, where you have a car waiting to make a left-hand turn, but they can't see far enough down the roadway to see if the turn is clear. So they continue to pull forward farther than they probably would just to see if they can get the sight distance for a safe turn. Meanwhile, in doing that, they've created a space for a car to go around them on the right, which is really driving on the shoulder or ditch or, you know, unintentional drivable surface. And so we see a lot of challenge here at this Agnes intersection because of all of these deficiencies. And the deficiencies continue along the road. Yeah, David.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can you, sorry to interrupt your flow. Can you click on slideshow? It might be a little bit easier to see if the screen was bigger.
I was thinking about that, David, but it kind of like takes over.
Oh, okay.
PowerPoint punches me in the face when I try to do that. So
okay. Well, I'm sorry. Then go ahead.
I can. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
If anybody doesn't see it, yeah. If anyone is having trouble seeing things, I'll certainly come back and zoom in for you. Yeah, I apologize if it's too small. And if you're watching on an iPhone, that's probably even harder yet. So continuing on, Brookway Drive here, now we're getting down. We've come through the hairpin turns, you're out of your Grand Prix driving mode, but we still have challenges here at Brookway with drainage problems. There's been a number of accidents at this intersection, I believe citing kind of like rain and rain conditions. So we're curious if that's correlating to drainage concerns, maybe hydroplaning. And furthermore, the sight distance is still challenged, right? That's becoming a recurring pattern. And then finally, there's no pedestrian facilities at all whatsoever on the southern portion of the roadway. Not surprising given everything I just described about it. So to cap off, if you already weren't a fan of the southern portion of the roadway, then we have all of the accident data to share, and there's a number of accidents. We're actually working on an accident analysis to include in the document, simply because it's become very curious to us as to understand what's actually happening because of all of these accidents here. And the majority of the, not accounting for the Melbourne Road intersection, which is a part of this corridor, the majority of the accidents here are single vehicle incidents, which is to suggest most likely that there is, it's related to the road, right? It's not cars. Most of the accidents are single vehicle. The driver has encountered some attribute of the road that has led them to hit the guardrail or go off the road or, otherwise. And when the vehicles are not single vehicle, when they're multi-vehicle accidents, the majority of them are in the southbound lane where they're traveling downhill, and where the downhill lane, the southbound lane, has the most constrained sight distances. And so that's where we're seeing those rear-ending accidents along the corridor. So in short summary, the south portion of Rio Road, really from Stonehenge to the city limits, has some severe safety challenges. And our recommendations for this portion of the roadway are going to largely deviate from what we've been doing elsewhere on the corridor into some more specific, nuanced recommendations. So that's, in brief form, the summary of our general observations of the corridor. Now I want to go and I want to begin to talk about some recommended solutions. And I think I'm going to try to incorporate David Benish's comment here, because I think even if I can get my screen a little bit larger, it will benefit everyone. So bear with me just a moment while I do that. Stop share, full screen. Sure. Okay. Hopefully that's a little larger for everybody. I'm gonna do my best to roll with the automation features in PowerPoint. Okay. So the northern section of the road. This is what we talked about in January, where we proposed some general framework ideas. We talked about our observations, and now we've gone, these are the observations or the alternatives we were kind of thinking about last time. It was two. It was, should we just overhaul the typical section and allow the corridor to function relatively traditionally, and these new entrances to these new neighborhoods will be mostly full access? Or should we basically propose another roundabout at Penn Park and create really where most people are recommended to go and make a right-hand turn out of their neighborhood and use one of the roundabouts to basically effectively make a U-turn? We talked about that. We heard people's feedback and observations and concerns. And so what we've landed on is our current recommendation is to do what was alternative one, to not inhibit the movements with right-hand turns only, but to really use these developments that are happening soon to help us build the corridor that we want. And that corridor, what we're trying to do is create the character of Rio Road East here. We're trying to integrate it with what's happening at the John Warner intersection. And we're trying to bring some additional safety as well. And so what we see here with this current concept is we have an overlay of the Rio Point development here on the south bottom of the page. You can see how that's going to start to fit into the corridor as a whole, although I'm sure you've already seen that. But so starting from the left and working to the right, so you can see we're integrating with the VDOT established roundabout concept. And so the medians kind of work together there to establish a uniformity coming off of Rio, John Warner Rio intersection, and then this portion of Rio Road South. We're glad to know that these developments are going to afford the opportunity for the shared use path to basically connect to the John Warner Trail, John Warner Parkway Trail, and really start to work that trail down toward Penn Park. And so because all the developments are happening on the same side of the road, at least in this case, we have the opportunity to work with to guide those developers based on this plan to build out this portion of the roadway with the shared use paths. And the difference here, it's subtle, and it might be noticeable compared to other places you've driven, but we're trying to establish the width as uniform, which is what creates the space for those raised medians. Whether they don't have to be raised. I know there's been a lot of conversation about plantings and who's taking care of it and all of that. The point is that the roadway has this fixed width, and that width more or less keeps the uniformity and the predictability, and then further promoting safety. And so by a slightly constrained corridor. So we're proposing raised medians with a consistent right-of-way width, and we're using these very near-term developments to help us build that out. All of this improvements happening on, the south side of the road. And then there'll be, after these developments come through, there'll be one portion of the corridor still needing a shared use path, but we're recommending that shared use path get down to the Penn Park Road signalized intersection. What you'll note in the final document, and based on some feedback from the county, is that signalized intersection at Penn Park, which is here, you can see my cursor moving, that intersection could eventually be changed out for a roundabout. That still works. That a roundabout or an augmentation to the intersection there can still work with the corridor concept as shown here. Interesting to note too, we're going to recommend that here at this intersection, the shared use path crosses, and then when it continues, it will continue on the other side of the road. There's a couple of reasons for that. We'll get into that in just a moment. If you can see this is what the typical section through the north portion of the roadway will look like. Shared use path if you're looking toward the John Warner Parkway intersection, shared use path on the left, and then the traditional sidewalk will be on the right, and then the roadway will be in between as shown here. Okay, moving to the central section. And so this is new. We're just going to kind of play off of what we introduced some of the observations to be earlier in this chat. So here is the corridor, central corridor, and then here is an overlay of our current concepts for the central section. I want to introduce this by saying this is where our work is starting to become a little more infill and a little more nuanced. We're not proposing any intersection overhauls. We're really just trying to take all of those deficiencies that we noted and trying to resolve them, but also make it work in the context of the corridor as a whole. Like I said, the shared use path will change sides at the signalized intersection, and now it'll be on the east side of the road. And that's allowing us to incorporate this meandering sidewalk that is current. The meandering that we see is, in my mind, more indicative of a shared use path than it is of a standard 5-foot sidewalk. And we're going to try to use that to continue the shared use path through this portion of the corridor, but now it's on the other side of the road, which is where the lofts is. And it's also providing, opportunity for folks to get down into Penn Park. And also, as we think, another logical connection to be thinking about for the county is Penn Park Lane, which is here by the red asterisks, where folks who might be walking or traveling by bike can go through Lachlan Hill, use their new pedestrian bridge, and effectively get up to the Locust Avenue corridor to come into downtown Charlottesville. That would effectively let someone walking, jogging, biking, using a stroller to avoid, although stroller would be challenging going up to Locust Avenue, but nonetheless, it's still probably preferable to navigating the south section of Riot Road. And so we're starting to think about how do we get the pedestrians and the bikes off of this roadway prior to going down the Grand Prix Boulevard, that is the south section of Riot Road. You'll notice that we've visually and characteristically trying to unite the central section to the north section. If money and resources were unlimited and we could just build everything we wanted, we would really like to allow the central portion of Riot Road to begin to blend into the north section, and that would actually become kind of one consistent character. And that's what we're representing here. Because there's some awkward lane widths and awkward turn lane tapers and all those things that I mentioned, we believe the space is available to be able to fit in a left-hand turn lane for town lane. And those left-hand turn lanes are really important because they get vehicles off the through lane and allow cars to wait to make their turn and also let cars keep moving. So those left-hand turn lanes are paramount. We've also done some augmentation in front of the lofts. We've removed the bus stop. We've reclaimed some of that space. We would promote that the bus stop actually uses the turn lane, which is what CAT prefers to do anyways. Interestingly enough, the ridership of this line is almost unmeasurably, unmeasurable. It's so low. I think maybe 3 to 6 riders a day. It's very, very low. And so we were willing to kind of repurpose some of that space to help fit in the shared use path there in front of the lofts. I'm going to talk about number 5, and then I'm going to come back to that red asterisk. Number 5 represents really us redefining the Rockbrook Stonehenge intersections that are kind of one amorphous and odd intersection into 2 intersections, split up and logically organized so that we can begin to promote safety and that we can actually provide some degree of access management standard. So that's what we've elected to do down at Stonehenge and Rockbrook. Finally, the red asterisk. Ryan from our team was very curious about the vertical curve of this roadway. As we walked the corridor, if you're walking it, and probably driving it as well, if you're paying attention to things like this, like a civil engineer might, you notice as that road crowns, your visual sight distance is impinged on that portion of the road right by the Penn Park Lane intersection. And really what Ryan discovered is that based on the vertical curvature of the roadway there, the speed limit should be lower. It should not be a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit. It should be no more than 30. And we think that discovery alone warrants the county and or VDOT and or us or whomever to really take up the banner that says the speed limit here should be lower. And it should be lower, really rallied around safety more than anything else. The typical section is the same as the north section, except the shared use path is now on the opposite side of the road. And now the southern portion and our recommendations there. And here we're still working things out a little bit for ourselves because it's been so different than the rest of the corridor here on the southern portion. What we're really doing along the southern portion of the corridor, I'm going to skip ahead to here, is we're going to give the county basically a laundry list of safety improvements to make. We'll still talk about pedestrian and bicycle connectivity, but it's hard to really talk about introducing people on bikes or walking into a roadway that is unsafe. And the work on the southern portion of the roadway is really basic safety improvements. And when those basic safety improvements have been made, then we can talk about really implementing multimodal transportation options. But for now, there's a long laundry list of low-hanging fruit for safety improvements, as well as opportunities identified for the county to approach the city for some project sharing, because this intersection here, which is Agnes, which is that one where we showed the picture of the red truck going around the car, it's really a gateway into the city as much as it is a gateway into the county. And so we think there's a number of opportunities for the city and the county, hopefully, to have a positive discourse about what can be done there. So we're kind of changing away from our, like, here's some recommended solutions to, here's a laundry list of improvements that need to be made. And as these improvements are made, as the safety of the road is improved, then we can begin to really think about the longer vision of bikes and peds. Like I said, this has been so different for us that we're still kind of organizing our thoughts around how to present that, but it's probably going to look like 3 maps. One kind of very near-term improvements, one some mid-range improvements, and then some longer-range improvements, and really not talking about the long range until the near-term safety improvements have been made. Okay, I'm almost done. Sorry, thank you for bearing with me. This has been a lot of talking. So next steps, where we're going from here. We're working diligently to put a bow onto this document we've been talking to you all about for the better part of a year and a half, if not 2 years now. So tonight, I'd like to hear basically your feedback on what I've shared tonight. You can agree, you can disagree, you can offer feedback, thoughts, insights, whatever. We want to hear from you. General feedback, north, central, and south. It's all on the table. We're going to continue to respond to that feedback over the next couple of weeks. And then we're going to meet some of you. I forgot to put it on here, but there's going to be an open house at the center. I think it's April 11th. And we'll be there to continue to dialogue here, really at that point, kind of help really put the polish on the document. And then in mid-April, the document will be submitted to the county to then share it with the Planning Commission, I think, for their working session at the end of April. And then I think that the document itself should be mostly in its finished form, but with the opportunity to make some final revisions, I guess, before it goes to the Board of Supervisors. So that's the road ahead, but you can see that this plane will be landing really between now and June. So this project will finish in this fiscal year for the county. Fiscal year turns over in July, so we'll be done before then. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to open the floor up to Marty or David. I think one of you should probably MC this event. And our team, Kendra and Ryan, are also here. We will be able to respond to your questions and talk about that. So I'm going to stop talking now.
Okay, so let me start with the CAC members. Who has any either short questions or comments? We'd like to try to keep everything to 2 to 3 minutes. So everybody gets a chance, and then we'll also open it up, as I suggested, to anybody on the public who's also watching this. So who would like to start? Anybody? Judy? Unmute yourself, Judy, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, you mentioned, or thanks, Daniel, for giving this presentation. The question that I have is, you did talk about line of sight at various spots on Rio Road, but one place that back in phase 1 at the John Warner Parkway, the intersection of Dunlore Drive and Rio, that line of sight there is terrible. Any recommendations? You know where I'm talking about, where they're the vertical strips or the vertical yellow poles that VDOT put up for safety that are now tumbling down. Right in there, the line of sight there is awful.
Are you talking about this Dunlore Rio intersection here, but near this number 1?
Yeah, well, I guess right now, maybe it won't
Yes.
be quite as much of a concern once that roundabout is built. But is this part of the road that's green right here to my left? Keep going, keep going. Oh, keep going. Yeah, right in there. Is that going to be leveled any?
Well, it have. What do you mean by
I can do
level?
that if you want.
Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, so thanks, Judy. We actually did notice that on our field visit. However, that was during the construction of that county sidewalk project, which is right there. So we have yet to see it in its final form. We also know that that intersection is not going to be, the left hand out is going to be prohibited when the roundabout gets installed. So that will further help with that problem. If you're turning right, you only have to look in one direction. The turn movement is a little bit quicker, so the sight distances required are a little bit shorter. So it's hard to say exactly if it's still going to be a problem. These improvements will help with that, but it's difficult to say at this point. We haven't gone through we're not proposing regrading the road. I don't know what the extent of that roundabout grading is. They may they may rework the grades in that area, but I don't think that's been designed yet. So we don't quite know the answer to that, but we are aware of the problem.
Okay, so this at least puts this, confirms that it's on your radar.
Yes, yes. And these improvements will definitely not make it worse. They will make it better. I can't say how much better.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Other members, could
Thanks,
you
Brian.
remove the there we go. Share the screen. Anybody else? I can't see everybody. Very quiet tonight. Okay. Let me ask you a question. Oh, Rick, go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, I really appreciate the amount of work that you all have put into this and analyzing what is a very peculiar stretch of road. And I want to say that I very much like the idea that you're putting forward of having a consistent look, feel, speed, confirmation of going from the John Warner Parkway all the way to the entrance into Stonehenge. I think the idea of making that a consistent flow and a consistent look, using the medians, using the narrower lanes where we can do that, I think it's a good job. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you, Rick. Appreciate that.
I think I was going to say it's not too much of a surprise, Daniel, as I've driven up and down that road a lot, you could see a lot of the problems. I could see a lot of the problems that you've identified. I do echo Rick's and support Rick's comments as well. I have a question for you. How would you characterize this road? It's, we talk about the other part of Rio as an arterial road. This was in my view, was a country road that's grown. How should the county think about it? Because that helps, think about how they frame how much funding and effort to put to fix the road.
I think I'd like to ask Ryan to respond to that question as well, because I know Ryan spent a fair bit of time going through the county's ordinance on the street typologies. So Ryan, you want to weigh in on that?
Sure, yeah. So we, at the beginning of this, we of course go through all of the county planning documents that are supposed to help designers like myself to try and make some of those determinations of like what is the purpose of this road. And this road actually falls directly in between two different typologies that are in the comprehensive plan. One of them is what's called a through street, which is characterized as not having too much development along the sides and mostly used as a through corridor to get from point A to point B. And then the other typology that it kind of fits is a local street, which is characterized by lower speeds, no turn lanes. You have houses on single family homes, fronting right on the road. So portions of this road feel like a through street typology, and portions of it feel like the local street typology. And so we actually looked at both of those sections and we said, okay, well, what is paramount here? We don't think the traffic is going to decrease. So we need to incorporate the minimum elements from the through street typology. Part of that typology, I don't have an image up, but part of that typology is shared use paths on the sides, which help offer multimodal functionality. So it gives people the option to, instead of driving their car into the city, maybe they can ride their bike or walk. It also is characterized by a median. So separating those through traffic lanes. And that will help to channelize traffic, but it also kind of implies that you're limiting left turning movements, which interrupts traffic flow. So with our kind of hybrid mashup of those two sections, we chose to apply the medians, but still leave the turn lanes open. Now, in the future, the county says it's causing the left turns out of the neighborhoods are causing too many problems. You already have the width established. You could potentially go back and close those and restrict some of the access through some of these other entrances if that's needed to maintain traffic flow along the road. So I hope that answered your question. It's a little tricky to answer. There's not a clear, clear answer on this one.
Yeah, I think that was interesting, Ryan, from my perspective, to just get a sense of it. How did you, I mean, this is a road that people take to go all the way downtown. In that sense, it's really a through street. And I frankly have a concern that as John Warner Parkway fills up, people will use this road more. Do you have a sense at what point or what traffic flow the county has to consider to really take a harder look at whether restricting left turn lanes, make it more of a through road?
Well, I will say if there, as long as you have adequate storage in your left turn lanes and the users are willing to wait for an acceptable gap to make that left turn, it will keep the through traffic moving. That's why I have the left turn lane, so people don't have to stop. So the first priority to preserve the capacity of this road is to get left turn lanes where they're needed so that there aren't accidents and that the through lanes can keep moving. Just to kind of give you a ballpark, a single lane of traffic can, if it's at the max kind of rule of thumb that we use is about 1,800 or 1,900 vehicles per hour at peak flow rate in one direction. So roughly that translates to 18,000 or 19,000 vehicles per day. Now, in all of our traffic projections, even with the most conservative numbers, we were only seeing numbers upwards of like 13,000 or 14,000. Mm-hmm. So I think the roadway itself has capacity. What reduces the capacity is problem intersections and complex movements. So it may come down to one intersection that might reveal itself as the problem intersection as the traffic goes along. Likely it would be the signalized intersection at the Waldorf School would probably be the controller for the capacity of this corridor.
Okay, thank you. Ned, you had a question? Comment?
A question, but mainly to build on what Marty brought up. I mean, the fact is, before the parkway was there, it was an arterial road. It's just that the ARB, the entrance corridor designation, had stopped at the railroad tracks prior. So then the parkway gets built. We got the entrance corridor designation extended down that way, but people still treat it like an arterial. There are the local folks who are used to going that way to go downtown, know they're avoiding the mess at 250 that backs up from the parkway. So, while I see 29 to the parkway as a throughway, I don't know how to slow it down or limiting capacity there. The East Rio Road portion, it's the reverse in my mind. What can we do to reduce some of that capacity? Slow it down, make it safe. I like the left turns and the cars going because I think that's what drives a lot of the accidents. But the idea is that if people that are coming Rio and hitting, instead of going down the parkway, go that way, if the speed limits are lower, if they know it's a slower move through there, that should drive traffic down the parkway, which is where it should be going to follow the arterial road. So I like, the medians, the raised medians, some of that, all that has the look of kind of Park Street. When you go down, as you continue on East Rio, you go up into the city, they've got the way those curbs come out and the parking and the slowdowns. It's designed to reduce the traffic speeds physically, with whether it's a visual or actual curb outs and all those type of things. So to me, that's kind of what I'd like to see there. But that's just my opinion. So I don't know how others feel, but I'm not interested in trying to make the throughput here. While I want it to function, I don't want backups. I don't want a lot of congestion. but I'm not looking to try to help more volume go through this area, especially as the development's complete. There's more pedestrian activity, the sidewalks are up. For a two-way road, there should be less happening, not more. That might be a pie in the sky or naive to think that the capacity will lessen, but I think during peak rush hour, people will still sneak through there to try to avoid what's going on down the Parkway. But in general, folks might think, well, I can hit the Parkway, do 45, get up through there and be done with it, versus trying to navigate through a slower design corridor. But as we go through this, I'd be interested if other people think that that's the right concept for that stretch or not. That'll be important for me to know. Thanks, Marty.
Okay, thank you. Comments, other comments? I might ask one other question about the shared use path. Ryan, you explained it as if people are using it to go into the city. Of course, the other place that was mentioned by Daniel a number of times was going to Penn Park, into into the Meadow Creek, to the golf course, to the playground, tennis courts, etc. Last time when we met, somebody brought up the idea that, have you looked at connecting sidewalks off the sidewalk roads? Have you done that for this area in particular, Penn Park, since road, the sidewalk goes a little bit and then you have to walk on the street. And as the population goes along, grows, and people continue to use that area, I would expect that would be something that you would need to identify some way. I know it's a little bit of outside of the scope of the study, but on the other hand, do you have any sort of comments about the connecting path, particularly to on Penn Park?
Well, yeah, Ryan, do you want that one or do you want me to take that one?
Well, I was just going to say, we have looked at them. So one of the first things we did for this project was to kind of zoom out, make a big map, and look at all of the existing sidewalks and where there were gaps. But I think you're kind of touching on it. It starts to become outside of our scope a little bit. At the further, it's like how far away from the corridor is within this project and not. So we do identify those so that the county can at least at a minimum be aware of where the gaps are. I think probably someone else could speak to
Okay.
How far we can actually take that.
Okay, fine, thank you. I don't see any of the outside attendees have any questions so far. So Judy, you have a question, one more.
Yes, so I get a second go.
Yes.
Okay, a little bit to piggyback on what you were saying about the sidewalk, that you've got that gap. Daniel, you made a comment about that there's no left turn currently at Town Lane, and perhaps there should be. I believe it was at maybe one of the form-based code sessions that we were given options of what types of sidewalk crossings do you like? And that one, I don't know if it was Serena or somebody I asked, is there going to be any kind of sidewalk markings to go from one side of the road to the other side where a sidewalk exists and then a sidewalk does not exist, so people perhaps can get to the public transportation? And I don't remember exactly what the answer was, but then I said, because Danny, you also mentioned about the speed around that, maybe it ought to be lowered a little bit. So thinking all of those, or taking all those things into consideration, maybe and I don't know if this is in your scope or not, maybe consider having something like what's down at UVA, when somebody has to cross the street, or down by McDonald's downtown, so that people can push a button and the lights blink and that there's somebody who wants to cross because there's not really good visibility. So like I said, I'll leave it. I don't know if it's in your scope, but just maybe wanted to put it on your radar. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan, do you have
Thanks,
any
Judy.
comment?
We have someone from the public that has a comment.
Yeah, 1 second, Carol. I just want, Dan, did you want to comment on Judy's thought about sidewalks and controlling, having lights to cross? Is that part of what you're looking at any point?
This is the second time this week this has come up on 2 different county projects, and VDOT makes very clear what the requirements are for basically these types of pedestrian crossings for like a high visibility or rapid flashing beacon or some similar type of infrastructure to basically make the pedestrian crossing more visible. VDOT outlines that pretty explicitly on what's required. And as in the other meeting, that I'll just kind of repeat what was said, and that is, the warrant for such a provision is based on how many pedestrians are present. And right now would be a bad time to try to count the pedestrians because there's not many of them there. And so it's kind of one of these, it's kind of the opposite of if you build it, they will, if you build it, they will come. If the roadway becomes so congested with pedestrians that their safety becomes a challenge, then those types of things can be warranted. We acknowledge that that's kind of backwards for sure, but that is how the provision is made.
Okay, all right, thank you. So I see we have 2 attendees, just in order on my screen. Carolyn, why don't you do Sandy Cohn first?
Sandy, please unmute.
Okay.
Start speaking.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
So my question relates to this whole thing about pedestrians crossing as well as the left turns. Once the light at the intersection of the John Warner is taken away, there will be no traffic light between Greenbrier and Penn Park. And that's quite a distance with a continuous flow of traffic coming from the John Warner around the roundabout. And I have struggled to try to figure out how pedestrians cross any place between there, or how people make cars make left-hand turns. Has that been addressed? Because if the number of cars increases, as Ryan said, from above the 13,000 today, with the new developments on Rio Road and all the new developments on 29, that will increase the number of cars that will cut across on Rio to go to either John Warner or downtown. It seems to me you'll have a continuous flow of traffic and there'll be no opportunity for pedestrians or left turns. So if you could expand on that a little more, I'd really appreciate it.
Sure, yeah, you bring up an interesting thought, and I'll try to make sure I touch on all of them. If I miss something, please let me know. What I foresee is going to happen is, I think, a couple things. One, yes, the new roundabout at the John Warner intersection is going to kind of promote this continuous flow of traffic that you mentioned. I think, and that's the whole intent, right? Because someone other than us, but someone who I think was doing good work, realized that the intersection at John Warner and Rio needed a level of service upgrade, and that's where the roundabout came into play. However, that opportunity for free flow traffic is going to come to a halt more or less at Penn Park. And like Ryan was alluding to this when he mentioned it a few moments ago, but the road, and as a point of clarity, the roadway isn't currently carrying those volumes. It's carrying less than that. We're projecting out these numbers of 13 and 14,000 are our guess of what the road will carry when we see all this development happen. Excuse me. And so the road is currently carrying less than that. But the more cars that end up on Rio East, that traffic light at Penn Park is going to kind of become your saving grace, because it's going to become the pinch point at which people get stuck. And so when people feel like they can free flow and then they come to get stuck at Penn Park, and they do that every day, eventually they'll say, you know, I'd rather just keep free flowing down John Warner. So I think that that might be what happens. But I'd also like to add and kind of try to connect what Ned was saying, with what Ryan was saying, with what you're saying, is that the road has the capacity. It's if it can be organized well, and can we include elements that do both of these things, like Ryan was saying? Can we actually let this corridor be a hybrid to where we are slowing? I think the speed lowering is justified. I think that's very clear, and I think that that's a safety item. That's a sight distance thing. That when you're talking about level of importance of like what makes a roadway function safely, sight distance is near the top of the list, if not at the top of the list. And so that alone is going to help us slow the speed down, we think. The speed slows down. The Penn Park traffic signal continues to be a traffic signal and not a roundabout. That becomes the limiting volume. That becomes the limiter to the volume of the roadway. And we think that's a good thing, actually. I think it'll promote people to want to use a different route. So, but I think the road has a lot of, whether you like this statement or not, I think it's true. I think the road has a lot of capacity left in it. It's just, are we using it well? I'm not saying I want more capacity there. I'm saying that we shouldn't be necessarily scared of these numbers if the roadway is operating as it should.
Okay, thank you. Let me, Michael, Carolyn, you bring in Michael Dishak, please.
All right, Michael, please unmute yourself.
Okay. Well, I think you should investigate crosswalks as speed tables for this corridor. That way, without lights and things like that, just that would inherently slow traffic down. So keep that in mind. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Michael.
All right, so just for everybody, I'm gonna close the, thank you, Daniel, Ryan, for this session. Just remind everybody that there is going to be a place where you can meet with, I guess, Daniel, Ryan, Serena, who has been quiet below, Kendrick, at the center. David, again, April 11th.
April 11th, 10 to 12 o'clock. We will be in the lobby where you can, again, see what Daniel and the consultant team has presented, and we can talk through it and receive your comments.